All right, so a big thing, it's really popular right now, fasting, detoxing. What do you think about it?
Well, intermittent fasting is as you said, is very trendy right
Mm-hmm.
now. Um, I don't think it's a very new thing. I think people who've been experiencing famine and all of humanity up to this point has been, in some way, shape, or form, skillful intermittent fasters.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an ironic conversation that only could be had by an animal that has so much food. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
yeah.
The fact that we have so much food is the luxury that we get to talk about eating less of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's only the human,
Yeah.
only the Homo sapien gets to have these interesting conversations. And again, only in really developed first world countries do we talk about fasting, this intermittent fasting, this trendy thing where we just decide we don't eat all day, and
For a week.
yeah, oh yeah, I'm not eating for 3. I'm like,
Yeah.
that is definitely a luxury item.
Mm-hmm.
It's a luxury conversation. It is a great conversation also because we do eat too much, without a doubt. We do eat, we eat too much and we eat too often. I mean, again, if you think about our primate family, our primate cousins, the great apes, you're thinking about how they behave. When you want to understand, I think, when you really want to understand the human, you have to go back to our origins. You have to kind of observe us before we became domesticated, before we became, quote unquote, socialized and civilized. And the best way to do that right now is to go back to indigenous peoples that still exist in, say, the Amazon forests, places where really, civilization has not interrupted the way that we live in connection with the land. And I think that you go back to you'll find the same thing that you find amongst our primate cousins, the apes. You're going to find that, we hunt, we gather our food, we eat at different periods of time. No one's fat. You're not going to find obesity. You're not going to find people who are overweight, simply because the landscape and the environment does not allow for that kind of excess. That's excessive, and it is. And fat suggests extra.
Yeah.
It suggests I have extra energy stored. It suggests I have extra time to sit about and not be burning that fuel hunting and creating food, but rather I can just chill and food comes to me somehow, magically. So the real issue for the modern Homo sapien is that we have this luxury that affords us a sedentary lifestyle, which then we begin to fill with things to occupy our time, and eating is one of them.
Yeah.
So we find ourselves excessively eating when in fact our bodies don't require that much fuel to function and operate efficiently. But we create this false narrative, either whether it's a belief or it's even a physical addiction, which could be, in all honesty, could just be, rather than a physiological addiction, could be a psychological addiction.
Most likely, yeah.
But, we have created some kind of relationship with food that is so out of balance that we now find it interesting to talk about not eating, because that's what's not surprising about that is that is exactly what occurs in when you observe nature and you talk about congruency. Something swings way right and it corrects itself by swinging way left. So a society of people that eat too much are now exploring the idea of not eating at all, but in probably the best way we've ever done it. I'm gonna say that because it used to be that the conversation was just about weight loss.
Right.
You want to get skinny, well, just don't eat, fast. And that was the answer to the problem that was being discussed. And now we're not so much talking about being fat, we're talking about athletes, we're talking about healthy, normal people who are playing with fasting, who are saying, I don't need to lose weight, but I wonder if I could be healthier if I wasn't consuming so much food and I was freeing up some of my body's resources for repair.
Yeah.
And that is what becomes the more interesting conversation is, are we eating too much? Are we eating too often? What happens if we take a meal away and we adapt to only eating twice a day? Or we adapt to, the reason that I personally have a lot of experience with intermittent fasting or fasting in general and weight cutting is because of the professional fighters that I train, or I'm on a team with different fighters as the mobility trainer and coach. And I have watched these guys and I've participated as well as a team, participated in fasting and intermittent fasting and weight cutting to understand what the fighter's experiencing. Because, just so people understand this, when you see someone fight, and I'm talking UFC or Bellator, professional MMA fighting, what often happens is, you watch a person, they weigh 200 pounds, or let's say that the actual, it's the middleweight, so they're 185. Well, a 185 fighter walks around at about 210, sometimes 220. They could be 230, but the point is that the average is probably about 210. So right before the fight, you start cutting weight down until you get to the day, the day before the fight, where you weigh in at 185. So you've really cut a lot of, you've cut the kind of weight that a person obsessed with becoming skinny could just only dream of. You know what I mean? You're 210, 20 pounds, and now you're 185, and you're shredded.
Yeah.
And that in somebody's mind, they might be like, "Oh wow, that's amazing." That is incredibly difficult to do. It's also decently dangerous. It's not, I would not call it incredibly dangerous, because there is not enough data to support that the mortality rate of weight cutting is anything to even pay attention to, because it's not. But it has happened.
Yeah.
There has been a death contributed to weight cut. But again, very, very low mortality rate. So, fighters don't go into that situation like the same way a surfer doesn't go into the water, because people do get bit by sharks. And like every year, so many people die from shark attacks. Doesn't stop surfers from surfing. It's the same. The mortality rate is so low relative to the amount of surfers versus, So if you think about the value of cutting this weight and letting the body slowly sort of eat away at its fat, at the fat that's also stored in space, behind, because sometimes you can see fat because it's right under, the surface of the skin, but then there's fat that is also, weaving through, and in places where you wouldn't think fat was. It's not always just, on the belly. It actually can exist within all of the body's soft tissue areas. I mean, again, not inside a joint, but the general, for general understanding of, because I think, again, just so people are kind of clear, when they're like, well, once you've finished getting the fat that's just pinchable, you're done. But no, there exists fat also, in a way, within the web, of the body.
Depending on how much excess there is, it could be in the vascular
100%.
system, it could be in different parts, different areas of the body.
True.
It shouldn't be.
Yes, and you also start eating away. The body starts eating away at parts of the body that are, that basically are no longer in service. It's not necessarily using it for fuel. It's just beginning to basically clean house. So it's going organs, the liver, just all kinds of repair work is being done when the body is sort of triggered or set into, a state, of ketosis. This is the general science and idea. And again, I'm being very superficial about the way I'm describing it, so it's just easy to understand.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't, there's no reason to go into the exact biological occurrences. It's more important to understand, okay, what's the overarching takeaway here? Well, the body starts cleaning itself out because it starts eating away at all of these, at these, all of these places and parts, and this is the shadow stuff in the shadow. Starts to become revealed, and the body is basically free at this point because it's not digesting food. It's free to do a lot of repair work and a lot of regeneration because, of course, it's basically consuming itself. So it triggers almost, if you will, I guess, a state of cannibalism, and that's probably the best way to really say it. And so there's something very powerful when you're talking about detoxification, when you're talking about something like that. So fasting is a way to, allow the body to sort of have or occupy these states for periods of time. And that's the general purpose of it. I think it's really not about the following a protocol, but it's really more about understanding that you should eat when you're hungry and not eat when you're not. And what you'll start to notice is that mostly we eat out of habit. That's what starts to happen, is you start to figure out that most of the time you eat because you think you should eat, or because you are in the habit of eating at that time, or you are using food as a way to address some type of distress. So when you tune in and you use that critical thinking, that observation, that witness state, you start to notice that, am I really hungry? Because if I'm drinking water and I'm doing my thing, no, I'm actually fine. And then you also may want to explore pushing beyond certain states where hunger comes up. Just, again, you're not going to die. No one's going to die people cannot eat for days. It's not that you are going to die, but rather you're going to get an opportunity to examine what is real hunger for you. What is a moment where you really do need to eat? What is a moment that you think you need to eat versus it's time to eat? How do you regulate your blood sugar when you're constantly feeding food to the body? You can't. Your blood sugar is constantly doing this. You can't regulate when the body is in a constant state of disruption.
Yeah.
So it's really powerful work for you to fast, to allow yourself to actually see where the body is naturally regulating. And instead of you interfering and trying to regulate for it,
Right.
where you're like, you need to eat now.
Right.
I feel a little bit, I need to have some food.
Yeah.
It's like maybe you need to actually push through a little bit and allow yourself to balance out and see what happens. Because it's like this, and everybody can probably relate to this. If you've ever eaten as a kid a lot of sugar, or you grew up eating a certain way, and if you've ever fasted, have you ever fasted?
Yes.
Okay. Sweet becomes incredibly sweet.
Yeah.
Right? The difference between an apple pre-fast and post-fast is it's indescribable.
Yeah.
And that's because you have, of course, you've disturbed the palate. You've distorted the palate so that sweet, it's just basically overload at that point. And the palate is no longer able to experience the subtleties of sweet versus savory versus, sour. All these different things that show up in flavor are gone because it's just blah.
Yeah.
So by fasting, you also clear the palate.
Yeah.
And you allow yourself to actually taste what is sweet, what is salty, what is sour, and you're able to have a completely different relationship with food, and the flavor of food and the scent of food. All of that begins to come alive because you're no longer consuming concentrated sugar and concentrated fat and concentrated flour and salt, and you're no longer eating excessive amounts of it, so that your body really doesn't know the difference between what it needs and what you feel is a great value meal.
Right.
Oh my God, I paid $30 for this. I need to eat the whole thing.
Yeah.
My wife freaks out on me all the time because Melaine is like, you need to finish. And I'm like, I'm done. That's the thing. If I'm finished, I'm finished. I'm not going to eat. But that's that poverty mentality. Sure. My wife is German,
Okay, yeah.
but she's also Brazilian and German. Well, so she comes from two different backgrounds. The German background lived through the war, and the Brazilian background are basically, they're just sort of very simple, grandparents, they're simple people, and you eat what you eat what's on the what's on the table, in a way. So it's kind of like, but that mentality of I must finish everything. You can't waste anything. This also encourages you to become habitual as an eater rather than instinctual as an eater.
Okay.
I'm an instinctual eater. When I'm done, I'm done. I don't eat out of habit, and I don't eat because I have to. And I don't eat because I'm told to. I don't eat because that's the amount I made. If I don't want it, I'm done with it. And that's just how it goes. Because food is always going to be produced.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to stress over that. It's just how it's going to be. Yeah. So if I accidentally make too much,
it's okay.
It either goes in the fridge or I'm complete with it. It just depends on what it is. But that's how we begin to connect with this. And then the fasting aspect is such a huge thing for me. As an example, I know that part of my health is based on the fact that I eat this way. I've been intermittent fasting my whole life, but not doing it as a protocol. I have not been following some person's guidelines. I just eat like that. And look, at almost 50 years old, most people will agree I have the body mass and the build of a 20-year-old guy. I'm just skinny and wiry and fast and healthy, and I just have literally no problems in any way that are related to obesity or related to overeating. I just don't, and I think it's one of the most common things that people actually notice about me early when they meet me is how I eat, because I'm not I eat very simple meals. I'll eat rice with a piece of fish.
Yeah.
I'm very basic, and I don't eat, but I probably eat 2 meals a day.
Okay.
And sometimes 1.5. But if I'm eating 3 meals a day, it's because I'm training all day. It's because I'm doing something that warrants that kind of consumption.
Yeah.
But I do not do it based on habit or protocol of like, you must have breakfast, you must have lunch, you must have dinner. Not true. And that's how fasting should be approached.